And now, from the great state of Mississauga in Ontario, Canada, it's the Ted Woloshyn Podcast. Brought to you by Tom's Place. For the finest in men's fashion, Tom's Place will suit you. And ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. ETP Canada. And now, here's Ted.
Well, welcome everybody. Thanks very much for taking time to join us on the Ted Woloshyn Podcast. Much appreciated. Photographer John Rowlands spent more than 40 years documenting many of the greatest rock and roll performers of our time, literally from the Beatles right through to Lady Gaga. Fortunately for us, he shares these stories in a terrific book titled Shooting Stars Telling Tales, Behind the Lens of John Rowlands. The author is Canadian music journalist Bob Klanac. He, along with Mr. Rowlands, joined me on this day. Gentlemen, a pleasure having you on the episode this week, and thank you so much for taking the time. A and B, I love the book. There's some great stories in here. What a life, John. What a life. What a life.
Thanks so much, Ted.
Well, as I said in the intro, I mean, literally everybody from the Beatles to Lady Gaga. I mean, if you went through your life and you only photographed one group, and it was just the Beatles, and that's all you did, that's still a life worth living. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
But what blew me away is this all began when you were like, what, 13 years old? And you're...
Yeah, 13. And I met Brenda Lee at age 15. So she's still out there. I think she's on her last year of her touring and doing shows, but still 2 years ahead of me.
So at this point, were we already playing the guitar? Were we already into music?
Yeah, I was playing the guitar, and I didn't own one. I always borrowed one, but when they paid me $35, then I went down and bought a guitar. Didn't know how to really play it, but my dad built us a tree fort, and we used to lie out on the grass learning how to play, and that got my music up to the point I could join a band and travel locally, Toronto and upper state New York, Pennsylvania. And of course, with every band that I was working with, I loved to have the opportunity to go beyond my record company stuff and not doing gold records and things like that. Playing a guitar in New Jersey, I was on stage at Soundcheck and playing Keith's Telecaster with the Rolling Stones and 1,000,000 watts, and I hit a power chord, which just about blew me off the stage, much like the beginning of Back to the Future, the movie, you know?
Yeah.
It's just incredible the touch you need on guitars to get incredible sound out of it. It's like a feather on the strings.
Well, see, this is a real benefit because you're not only taking pictures of all these great musicians, but you've got a rapport with them because they understand that you understand what's going on. You're not just a guy with a camera. You're a guy who's got a passion for music who can actually play the music. And when you get George Harrison teaching you how to play a couple of licks from one of their tunes, and then a Rolling Stone teaching you how to play. I mean, there's not many people who have that opportunity.
Yeah.
So they knew, and when they knew it, clearly that opened up doors for you that it didn't for others.
Yeah, it added a nice comfort level to it. It was musicians talking to musicians, and they happened to take snapshots, just like the iPhone these days.
Yeah.
It brought a commonality between us, and they associated with it. And visually, I tried to capture their emotion and empathy on their faces and playing as a compliment to them. And I've done a lot of that, so I'm very pleased and happy with it. So.
I guess when you were asked at times, when you were hired by record companies to be the official photographer for Dave Clark 5 or whoever it may have been, it was exciting to be up on stage or near the stage and taking the pictures of them in action. But when they said, okay, we needed like an 8x10 glossy to send around, that probably bored the hell out of you, taking still photography.
Well, yeah, to a degree, yes. But still, I entered the business and charged $1 by 10. And, it's basically a second problem is get it there quickly so the record companies can use it.
Mm-hmm.
And back in the day, Tom Williams pulled me aside one day and said, "Hey, look, if you're going to tell me the pictures are going to be here at 10:30 the next morning, then be here at 10:30 the next morning, because the biggest part of my job is keeping my job." He told me in no uncertain terms that's the way to go. And sadly, he did the same thing when he left us. He took death by injection,
Mm.
as did Al Mayer, as did Peggy Saccone.
Bob, when did you first meet up with John? When did your relationship begin? And
Jeez,
how?
John, I think I met John about, 7, 8 years ago or so. I met him.
Yeah, maybe 8 or 9 even, Bob. So.
Yeah. And I met him about the same
Yeah, one
time.
of the cultural affairs here.
Yeah. I met him, and he and Nick Panasico would hang together all the time. So, of course, I'd already started talking to Nick Panasico about writing a book, which was Promo Man. And then, but shortly after, even while interviewing Nick, I'm hearing John's stories, and I'm going, well, these are great stories. And John was already he was starting to do this Rock and Rowlands audio-visual show where he would go out and show the pictures and talk about the stories behind the pictures. And being a writer, I thought, well, this is perfect. This should be in a book. So that's what came about the idea. That's when I proposed to John, let's do a book, but it's about the stories with the photos there to back it up. Because John has done photo books before, and they're great looking books, and they really showcase the amazing photographs at their best. And this isn't that book. This is a book about the stories behind the photos.
Is that the reason why all the pictures in the book are black and white, and you stayed away from all the color and excitement of the original photos?
Yes, that was exactly it. I mean, because also, you could do a book, but also I want to make sure that it's a book that's accessible to people so they can buy a copy and read the stories. If we had gone to color including it, he would have chopped the price way up. And, it's about access. It's about getting these stories out here.
And so the question I have for you in that regard, John, is, people say to me, well, who have you interviewed over the years? And I can recall a lot of them, but not all of them, but not with the kind of a precision that you did. Did you take notes when you were on tour with these bands, when you work with the Beatles and you work with Dave Clark 5 and the various people that you photographed?
Yeah, in the early days I did, and certainly events like in '75 where Jefferson Starship opened for the Stones on dates. The nice colored shot that's on the cover of the book, Gracie Slick in red, with lightning coming out her eyes. I went to Pine Knob in Michigan, and I'd blown up a scene 20 of that. And I went backstage with it to show her. She was very excited. And the next thing you know, I've got her tongue in my mouth. And that's, the kind of excitement you sure don't expect.
No.
I feel pretty good when it happens.
I'm wondering if the great photographer Boris Primo ever had that happen to him.
Yeah, I don't know.
So let's go back a little bit here. We talked about 15 years of age. You start taking pictures of Brenda Lee, and you're making like $35 for these pictures. I'm thinking, wow, $35 back then, that's like a lot of money, and like in today's standards. And not only that, you're like 13 years old, which is like double the amount of money that it should be worth, right?
Yeah.
And so then you go on the road with Dave Clark 5. You're the official photographer for Capitol Records. Of course, Capitol Records, home of the Beatles. Next thing you know, it's 1965, and you're taking pictures of the Beatles.
That's right. And the reason I didn't get them in '64 was I was up with the Dave Clark 5.
Yeah.
Or I would have had them then.
So you would have been there at Maple Leaf Gardens when they did their shows in '65 and '66. I think they did, right? I went to one of those shows on a Saturday afternoon.
August 17th, I think, both dates.
Yeah, couldn't hear a damn thing other than women screaming because they didn't really have any sound system per se.
I figured that out too, and I went down into the dressing room areas, at the side of the stage. And downstairs and through 3 cement brick walls, you could hear the lyrics. So I solved that problem, but you're not going to watch the concert and not hear it, or hear it and not watch it.
Yeah, exactly. The opening story in the book really sets the pace for the excitement that was your life, that is your life. December 1973 in Montreal with The Who, specifically back at their hotel. Tell that story, because it's just, I had to read it twice because I went, what?
Well, it was a Gold Records presentation, and I brought my brother along with me, and we stayed at the Bonaventure. Nice hotel, nice facility, and then we did the presentation and pictures accordingly, and then after the show, they came back to the same suite. And we waited half an hour for them to come, and Keith Moon comes in, and right away senses there's going to be some shrimp cocktails served, and he saw a dog ear on the burlap wallpaper that he could reach if he stood on the credenza with the crystal champagne glasses on it, stood up and crushed a bunch of glasses to pull on the dog ear on the wallpaper, and then just put his weight into stripping it down the wall. And then Townshend came in with Dr. John on his ghetto blaster, thumping away with, it might have been the right place, but the wrong time.
Yeah.
And immediately picked up the TV in the room and threw it through the window into the outdoor pool. So here he is doing Keith Moon's job of destroying the room.
Like, at this point, does anybody ask him, why are you doing that? Like, is there a point to this? Are you trying to make a statement, or do they just say, he just kind of did it?
Well, it's definitive to rock and roll, especially The Who. And Mooney, he was a nut for doing that kind of stuff. There's stories of him driving the tour bus into a pool. Alice Cooper was driving down the street in L.A., and Mooney's face comes over the top of the windshield and says, "Where are we going?" And he'd been living in Cooper's garage for a week. The guy did animal tranquilizers on stage, and that was his offbeat reasoning for his timing. He was an incredible drummer and a crazy head person. So
yeah,
just another ingredient to that sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Well, so then you get stories about those kinds of stories. Then you talk about meeting and spending time with Dolly Parton, who's at the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of manners and just decorum.
Yeah.
And you saved her from an injury, did you not?
Well, we were up at CFTO TV in Toronto and watching, I think it was Nashville North or one of the 2 or 3 country shows. And unbeknownst to Dolly, who was facing me, around the corner behind her came up, boom, big Hollywood boom that if it did anything, it had to weigh 2,000 pounds. So I grabbed her by the chest from behind and pulled her out of the way. And then all of a sudden, my hands just went, uh-oh, where are these? And I released my human bra.
Yeah. There are people who pay large amounts of money to be that heroic.
And then one time I was driving in Nashville, and I got cut off at an intersection, a big Cadillac Eldorado, and it was raining. I had a little bit of a burn on there and thought a little confronting this person. So I followed her for 5 or 6 blocks and I cut her off. And walking towards the car, expecting to see Jody housewife or something, and down comes the power window, and it's Dolly. So I said, "Well, you remember me, Dolly? I was the guy who was working with you in Toronto." And she luckily had remembered, so
yeah,
that worked out okay. But instead of road rage, it was, well, good to see you, and off we went.
I'm just going to throw a number of names at you because there's so many great stories here. And the question, first of all, though, to you, Bob, is when you're sitting there and you're working with John, putting this book together, and you're thinking, okay, well, I mean, there's so many stories. How do you decide what you keep, what you don't keep?
Well, that was tough, Ted, because quite frankly, John and I sat down and we looked at 650 photographs and they conducted interviews all the while. Ultimately, it came down to, I think I got in almost everything that I wanted to. But even then, you've talked to John. John's got this fantastic memory, as I'm sure you've even picked up today. He's telling about dates in 65 or something. And so quite frankly, stories kept coming out. And I'd have to and this happened with my previous book too. You have to kind of go, okay, wait a minute. I didn't know this story. Okay, hang on. I got to get this book. I got to get this in here. So quite frankly, it was tough. It was tough to kind of put it down into a book that's, reasonable thickness, let's say.
Yeah.
Just, yeah.
There's some great shots in there that really stuck out as I was going through the book. One of them, and for those people who know anything about Toronto and the history of Toronto, you'll understand the juxtaposition here, how bizarre it is. And it's a picture taken in 1971. It's Michael Jackson signing autographs at Honest Ed's. For people who don't know Honest Ed's was basically a bargain basement kind of a place where you could buy everything from kids' clothes to women's corsets to canned tuna to, whatever you want. It was all there. And I'm thinking, like, what the hell is Michael Jackson doing in Honest Ed's?
Well, it was the aspect of Honest Ed's restaurant at the Royal Alex. And that's where Skip Fox, the Polydor promo man, brought them after the show at the CNE. So I got a shot of the whole family at the door, and then Michael signing at the table that Skip Fox had put together for record industry folks.
Mm-hmm.
And that was often the case. I did it in Ottawa with John Poser. We did a 3-man press conference for the Stones in Ottawa, and he decorated the dressing room with pictures of the Stones in those days, and it made a nice background. And of course, I had pictures of everybody's autographs.
As I introduced you at the beginning of this conversation, talk about what you were one of the great rock and roll photographers, I look at the notes that I've taken here, and these are not rock and roll names, but these are big names and fascinating names. Dick Van Dyke, Jack Lemmon, Jack Benny.
Yeah. They all have stories, and because I'm plugging into the network of connections, I had things at the Royal York, thanks to Louis, the maitre d' at the Imperial Room.
Louis Janetta.
Yeah, Janetta. And he would be telling me Jack Benny's coming to town to do a plug for a brand new cigarette that McDonald's Tobacco's making. And would you like to cover the show? So I'd say, sure. Meet Jack Benny is going to be great. And then in L.A., I lived in Palm Springs for 23 years and would drive into L.A. for gigs there with people like James Burton and Jimmy Page, et cetera, et cetera. I gave the Jimmy Page to my friend Max to shoot, and he got into finding out about Hollywood shooting. And those are the kind of things that allowed me to find out what's coming in. Jack Lemmon was doing a special at CFTO for Harold Arlen's music and proved to be an incredible actor. And, he put knee pads on so he could fall on the floor effectively, which he did. And I saw this incredible guy doing it again and again because he didn't feel it looked right. And these kind of people, out of my idiom, are certainly worth the effort to get to know and take care of. And the same thing with Dick Van Dyke. I was going to a huge audio convention at the LA Convention Center, and 6 people in front of me was Dick Van Dyke. So I got to talking to him, and because he was a real good confidant to Stan Laurel.
Mhm.
And I came up to him and said, Mr. Van Dyke, number one, thank you for all the years of comedy that we've enjoyed from your talent. And by the way, how did you ever meet Stan Laurel? And a big story ensued, and that was just incredible. And then coming out to Palm Springs to play in the Sinatra, I had lunch for 7 years with Dick Van Dyke at the Australian Steakhouse restaurant that was intense at the Frank Sinatra golf tournament. And that was a conduit for meeting people like, who's that guy with the big, deep voice and the mustache from a TV show called The Ranch? Sam Elliott.
Right.
Meeting Sam Elliott, totally away from my idiom of rock and roll, but a really nice man. And I fit into a whole superstructure of his people at the Frank Sinatra.
Ted Woloshyn returns in a moment.
I've had the great fortune to say that I've been associated with one of Toronto's finest names in men's clothing for more than 25 years. Tom's Place. Founded by Tom Mahalick's father in 1958, Tom's Place offers brand name men's apparel at unbeatable prices. But more than that, they boast a long-serving, knowledgeable, and friendly staff that can assist you whether you're looking for casual or formal attire. And they have plenty of first-class tailors on site. In addition, Tom and his family are well known for their philanthropic work. So if you're looking to deal with great people who can fulfill your clothing desires at outstanding prices, do yourself a favor and visit Tom's Place. They're open weekdays from 11 to 6, Saturdays 10 to 5, and Sundays noon to 5. You'll find Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Or check them out online at toms-place.com. Tom's Place will suit you.
Now back to Ted Woloshyn.
The interesting thing is, if I can go back to the Dick Van Dyke story, which I found was fascinating, it's like you knew the way to get to Dick Van Dyke was not just to heap praise upon him, because they get that all the time, and that's really not the way. That's not what's going to open up the door, but you knew that something personal to him was his passion for Stan Laurel and how he met Stan Laurel. And his answer was pretty simple. I know how to read, and I have a phone book, and his name was in the phone book. And I went to his house, and I went, well, that's pretty easy. But the fact that you knew that he had this passion for Stan Laurel, that was what opened the door for you, just like you, the guitarist, opened the door to the musicians.
Right. And, when I met him and talked to him, it was just real. And walking around this audio convention, I looked in a seminar he was attending and saw the MC of the seminar going, thank you, Dick. That's a great question. So he knew what he was doing. The second part of that was my dad came to L.A. to visit me one year and booked a flight for a week. And I said, Dad, I invited you down here as my guest. Stay for a month. So we went and changed the tickets. He stayed for a month. I took him around. One of the places was touring Malibu. And we went to a restaurant called Marmalade in the colony down there. And we walked in to have breakfast. And here's Dick Van Dyke and this computer guy having a meeting. John Rowlands, over here.
Really?
He remembered my name. And I came over and introduced my dad to my new friend and talk about interesting father-son points.
Yeah.
I was too taller than my dad for half an hour.
Well, it's too bad that's such a great experience. You know, it's like being a father and seeing your son with this great amount of success, and then seeing your son being acknowledged by an immortal talent, Dick Van Dyke. That brings so much pride to a parent that unless you're a parent, you wouldn't understand that. But if you are, you certainly would. But I was thinking after hearing that story and thinking, it's too bad your dad wasn't there when you're taking pictures of Peter Tosh and smoking pot with him.
I don't think my dad would go that far
Probably not.
because he worked for the Royal Canadian Air Force Association
Mhm.
underneath the Vice Marshal Hugh Curtis. And he also was instrumental when he left and retired with the Canadian Health Insurance Company that put together OIT. And one word of advice from him was, don't ever work as somebody's assistant, because in all reality, you do all the work. And the other thing that he turned down after his retirement was vice president of de Havilland Aircraft. And that got me maybe a 10-minute conversation with Harrison Ford,
Of course.
who has an otter, knows how to fly it. And we talked about that when I met him at a reception at one of the hotels in
You see, this is a good lesson for people who are getting into the industry in terms of how important it is to connect with somebody before you start interviewing them or taking pictures of them or spending time with them. It's do your research and find out something about them that nobody else is going to come at them from that
right
angle.
on. Yes, sir. And that's always in my mind. I'm not a Craig Ferguson, who is just the ultimate of quick response. But I pride myself in being on top of the background in order to do that. And it makes it a lot more comfortable and unformatted. I got over that with the Dave Clark 5 in the very early days. And I was very happy for that. And it goes on today.
Yeah. Bob, when you were listening to the stories and going through the pictures with John, anything that stuck out to you that you just think, well, okay, I want to hear more about this. This is blowing me away. This is fascinating me.
Well, I ended up going back to John to get some details on things, but one of the stories I like was simply the early Beatles. I mean, the context, and I think I get into this in the book, the context of the 17-year-old kid, you know, being at the Beatles press conference with all of these seasoned journalists. And of course, John's already been chatting up George Harrison. He got an invitation to go and have, was it rice pudding with them in the dressing room. So he already had a rapport built so that there's a great photo. It's on the cover of the book as well, of the four of them. And John, simply because of his youth and because he was so close in age to the Beatles, simply asked John Lennon, saying, hey, or he asked George, his friend already, hey, John, can you, George, can you get John to stand next to you so we can do a foursome? And the photo itself is great, not just because it's a foursome, 2 and 2, but also because George is looking at the camera, John's camera. The other three are looking off out into the press conference at other people. George's focus is on the camera. That pulls you in. And, who else could have pulled that off? Someone who was very close in age to the Beatles at the time. So it's that. And plus, just also very much in line with what you're saying about John. He was able to go up to people and just start talking to them because John's very affable, very, very easy to talk to, and he has no issues with talking to someone. He's, as John said, he does have the background on things and on people, but also he has an affability about him that is just undeniable.
So
which I think
when I mentioned earlier that you had to learn to play some guitar riffs from the Beatles, it was in fact George Harrison, and the song was 8 days a week. I realized that you don't play the guitar anymore as we get older. A lot of things you can't do that you used to be able to do, but could you still play the opening chords for 8 days a week?
No, I can't play anything. I have my left hand is as a result of 3 strokes, and my left side is kind of paralyzed. And then I've got osteoporosis in my fingers and can't bend my knuckles. And I call this one the Concord.
But when this happened, how many of your friends did you turn around to and say, listen, watch this. Watch me play 8 days a week. And by the way, you know who taught me how to play that? George Harrison. And of course, your friends look at you and go, yeah, you're so full of it.
Yeah, well, it worked for a few years. Yes, sir. The other tune was I Feel Fine, so I saw John put his fingernail on the strings, and get that sound.
Yeah. I guess one of the disappointments, and correct me if I'm wrong, would have been the fact that you came this close to shooting the cover for a Bob Marley album, but it didn't happen.
Right. Yeah. Well, I did a lot of work through RCA with somebody in the Hot Rods, Eddie in the Hot Rods, and their road manager became a friend of mine, and I knew how to find somebody that could facilitate a young lady's attention. And he said, John, I owe you on that. And he saved it up and said that he would present my photography to Bob. And then he flew me down to New York to meet with Bob. We had lunch at Wolf's Delicatessen on 2. And we enjoyed Bob in the conversation, the background of how his mom got him a job at one of the car plants in South Carolina, putting doors on Fords or whatever. And Bob said, well, usually I have one of the brothers shoot my album jackets, but we're going to let you do one too. And then sadly, it didn't happen because the guy died before the album came out.
Now, I understand from talking to other photographers over the years that generally speaking, when you're taking pictures at a concert, they'll say, okay, you have the first 8 minutes or 18 minutes or whatever of the show that you can record, whether it be video for television or whether it be still photography. But you had, because of your relationship, you had the kind of proximity that nobody else had. Like I'm taking the story where you're in Ottawa, and there's like a riot about to break out at a Stones concert, and so these cops are surrounding the stage, and you're like in between the cops and the Stones. So you're like on the stage with the Stones. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was the rule, that I could go anywhere behind the police. And when the faction in Ottawa were Squirrels and the Yohucks, Beach Boys and leather jacketed guys against each other, and they broke into a fight. So I got up on the stage and wandered around for really good shots of the guys playing. Took pictures of Mick Jagger being like 5 feet away from me he's got his tongue out. And that was the only time I ever got to shoot the Stones on stage. But the rest of the stuff I got with a good telephoto, and hopefully I've seen the show before, knew where to be and when. The Stones, for the 6 tours I worked, had armbands for me that they would tell all the workers that the guy with the black armband on it is the Stones photographer. So that was my safety.
Willie Nelson. Tell me about Willie Nelson.
Well, early days, 1971, I met him at the Horseshoe Tavern on Queen Street, and very into it guy about his recording company and so on. He hadn't written any of the huge hits he had later on, but Whiskey River was one of them, and I found that out quickly because we had whiskey and beer chasers at the Horseshoe. And then 75, when he signed with CBS and was getting $1 a side for his album. And then in 2007, he played Coachella, which was in Palm Springs, where I lived. And it was an afternoon concert and nice lights, so it was great. I'm up there not expecting anything, and he's playing along with Trigger and narrating his show and whatnot. And I move in with my telephoto and shooting from 15, 20 feet away. And then I get a little closer, and he's strumming the guitar, and he looks down, leans forward, and says, "Hi, John, how are you?" And a little break between the music. And that happened with Brad Paisley, too, a couple of years later. So those type of things are very ingratiating, that I know I'm making a mark somewhere in the industry, whether it's with the people I should be working with, the gold records, or just the fan stars that artists are to people I work with.
I want to finish off with a story about David Bowie and the Archer shot.
Right. Well, it was a gold record presentation with the incredible Ed Preston, and I'd seen the show in Montreal and loved the Archer pose and knew where it occurred in the show and made myself enough time to shoot the show and get to be where I had to shoot it. And the interesting thing was back in the film days, you couldn't do that on the road that often. So I put my darkroom into the washroom of the hotel. And that way I could come back from the concert like I did in Toronto to Hyatt downtown. I processed the film in tanks, hung it up to dry in the washroom for 3 or 4 hours, which time I slept. Then I had my enlarger in there, small Durst 606, made contacts on resin coat paper, which was plastic and would be almost dry when you pulled it out of the chemicals. Let them dry on clips. 15 minutes later, I go across to have breakfast with David. And I had 19 breakfasts with David Bowie on that tour. And that's, he complimented me with a nice autograph because I took blank boards with me, 11 by 14s, and they would sign a complimentary autograph for me. And he wrote, "To John, with respect, David Bowie." So that's my thank you very much.
Your works, are they available for purchase, any of these copies of these works?
Yes, we're selling 17 by 22 on mule art paper. My broker in Toronto is Jeffrey Shire, who's a shrewd businessman. We also have library prints for the same money and smaller. And I have a gentleman named Paul Lambert, who's a fantastic processor of inkjet. And we make inkjet prints that are just superb.
So if somebody wants to purchase some of these, what is the best way for them to access this?
Well, basically, I'm available at John Rowlands at gmail.com is my email. My friend Max and I in Palm Springs were trying to get onto these rock and roll cruises, or anybody can book the show for transportation in and out and an overnight at a hotel. And that way I can get out, do the show, sell the books and the prints. So, and you can check out on YouTube, John Rowlands Promotion. And there's a 40-second clip of my show and what I do with it and all the people that I've affected, which is kind of like.
Well, because I'm thinking that there must be hundreds of people out there, thousands of people out there who would love to have some of these shots because they're just amazing.
Well, I just wanted to clarify something. John's email address is johnrobertrowlands at gmail.com. So
okay, good one. Thanks, Bob.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so johnrobertrowlands at gmail.com because John's prints are amazing.
Yeah,
quite frankly.
As is the book, as I've mentioned. It's called Shooting Stars, Telling Tales Behind the Lens of John Rowlands with Bob Klanac and John Rowlands. And if you're a fan of, I don't care what kind of music it is, or what kind of entertainers it is, it doesn't really matter. This is just such a great behind the scenes, great stories, fabulous shots. I recommend everybody pick this up. And gentlemen, I can't thank you enough for taking the time.
Ted, thank you.
Thank you, Ted. It's worth it very much.
Thanks so much.
We should let people know we went through some technical issues in order to get this together, but because between
we went back to school, all right, yeah.
Between the three of us, we don't have enough technical expertise to put flashlight batteries in the right order.
Chaz.
Gentlemen, thanks so much. That'll do it for another episode. Yeah. Drop by our website, tedwoloshin.ca. Check out some of the older episodes as well. Leave a comment and your thoughts as well. We would appreciate that. And we're on YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe. It costs you absolutely nothing. And also it would cost you absolutely nothing when you're online. Fill out your organ and tissue donation card. You could change or even save a life. In the meantime, have a great week.
The Ted Woloshyn podcast has been brought to you by Tom's Place. For the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices, it's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. And ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. Technical production by Paul Gatt. Music by Bike Thieves. For more on this podcast and our sponsors, and to talk to Ted, go to www.tedwoloshyn.ca.